Hello everyone, my name is McGaddis and welcome to the second installment of a video series of the locked classes for 2nd edition Gloomhaven. I'll be continuing the locked classes today with Music Note, a class we unlocked early on in our campaign and who one of my fellow mercenaries is still playing, and they're currently level 5 with this class. Probably goes without saying, but the remainder of the video ahead will contain heavy spoilers for the Music Note class. So now is the time to turn this video off if you don't want to be spoiled for any of the information surrounding that class. If you're looking for videos on the spoiler-free starting 6 of Gloomhaven 2nd Edition, I have a playlist put together for my video analysis of those classes instead. This video will function as more of a review of the class, as I have not yet myself played the new version of Music Note, so my discussion will be more theoretical based on our experiences of the class in 1st Edition, as well as comparing their kit to what is now available in 2nd Edition. My teammate has been enjoying his time thoroughly with Music Note so far, and it looks like he'll be this class for quite some time, based on his personal quest. So we've been comparing notes in the class compared to how it was before as well. I'll definitely try and make note of major differences between the two, as it is one of the classes that saw the most significant changes between 1st and 2nd edition. Okay, spoilers for the video are going to start now. The spoiler name for Music Note is the Quattrell Soothsayer, although he is affectionately known in our party as simply Bard. They sport an 11 card hand size as well as a low health pool of 6 starting at level 1. Just like 3 spears before them, this class is often known to be part of a colloquial Big 3 in 1st edition, being one of the overall strongest classes and having some truly absurd abilities. Their core mechanic of playing songs remains, however the way in which they do so has heavily changed, which is why they've gone from a 9 card hand to an 11 card hand in 2nd edition. To quickly summarize the power of 1st edition Music Note, there were some scenarios where the monsters simply never got to act for something like 50 to 75% of their turns due to mass disarm, stun, and curse, some of which were available as early as level 1. This was backed by songs the Music Note could put up with no other cost or restriction. Other than that, you could only play one song at a given time until level 1. And they were, just as in 2nd edition, all non-loss persistent abilities. The songs were generically powerful abilities, such as permanent disadvantage to all monsters early on, +1 to all attacks performed by all allies, each ally performs a heal to self each turn, things like that. When the monsters did occasionally get to attack, often when you were putting up a song on a given turn, you would already typically stuff their deck full of curses, and the disadvantage song might be playing, which meant they would draw a null or a curse anyways and not actually get to deal any damage, followed by turns where you disarm or stun them, and therefore basically they are ineffective for the vast majority of the scenario. Fast forward to 2nd edition, the overall theme of the class being a support-oriented backline unit playing songs and having access to conditions such as disarm, stun, and curse, and buffs for allies has not changed. However, each song has a unique cost associated with it, some combination of these high and low notes that you're seeing on the character mat here that you need to play in order to perform a said song. Songs can take between 1 and 4 notes, respectively. You can have up to 2 high and 2 low notes at any given time. And any leftover notes are removed after playing a song, and you start with 1 note of your choice at the beginning of each scenario. All songs remain non-loss persistent abilities. However, the 1 song per time restriction, of course, has been removed, as you now need to collect notes to make these songs or play them. This means that the Soothsayer is still powerful when played well. However, they'll require good planning and sequencing of notes to make their songs in a timely fashion. This also means that they don't have nearly as much access to non-loss mass disarm and stun, which is good news as well. Unfortunately, the power level previously meant that a damage soak or frontline archetype essentially felt unnecessary a lot of the time with a Soothsayer in your party, as the enemies weren't effectively doing anything anyways on a lot of their turns. So this was a needed change, and so far our Soothsayer player has been very happy with the changes, as he's been looking forward to the rework of this class for a long time now, basically since 2nd edition was announced, as he's a big fan of Music Note and has played the class the most in our group, in either of the 2 groups actually that we play with. This class will need to pay special attention to both the kind of songs it wants to play, as well as your note generation between high and low notes, as you'll need a mixture of cards that give you both notes. Do keep in mind, however, that you can only gain 1 note by default on any given turn, although the note is gained immediately, unlike elemental infusion, which happens at the end of a given turn. So your bottom note, for example, can generate a note, and then you can immediately play a song with that note for your top action, as all songs in this class are top actions. You'll also want to have a mixture of songs that cost 1, 2, and 3 total notes. As loading up on all songs that cost 2 or 3 notes means it'll take you quite a while to kind of build up and actually impact the battlefield, whereas playing only 1-note songs means you're going to have a lower impact overall. As far as strengths and weaknesses for this class go, it is a master of both positive and negative conditions, boasting access to Bless, Strengthen, Disarm, Immobilize, Curse, Muddle, Stun, Push, Pull, and Wound. It does not have a tremendous amount of healing and no poison and safeguard specifically, otherwise fits very well into a supporting role. It also has great access to command and grant actions, often for allies, giving allies move and attack actions, sometimes shields and retaliate, and even occasionally controlling the monsters to attack each other. It's definitely best in parties with numerous allies, as many of its abilities do require an ally to target. So in a 2-player party with no summons, it may feel a bit on the weak side, being a pure supporting role. In a 2-player party, I'd heavily advise looking into the sub build where you actually deal a decent bit of damage yourself, leveraging some of these attacks and songs that care about attacks more so than you might need to in a 3 or 4-player party. With that being said, our own Bard is having a lot of fun with the attack-focused sub-build and is kind of experimenting with it a bit, and it has been going so well so far, even in a 4-player party, as it particularly takes off at level 5, which we just hit recently with our party. Its initiative control is moderate, so that's another thing to keep in mind. It's very good at going in the first half of the initiative spectrum, so it can go very quickly, but it will struggle to go slow as it only has a handful of cards that allow it to do so, so these are a bit more rare. It is, of course, also very frail with a very little access to defensive abilities for itself and only having 6 health. But this is generally a long-range combatant kind of character and will not often really be in the front line. In fact, it doesn't even necessarily need to be in the same room, as a lot of the time it simply needs that line of sight to its targets, and these songs don't even specify a range on them. So you can, as long as you have line of sight, even be back a room, something like 5, 6 range away, some portion of the time. Although you'll want to be typically within range 3 or range 4 of your allies a decent chunk of the time for your non-song abilities. It is also elemental agnostic, not producing or needing any elements whatsoever, and its access to real damage is fairly limited unless you build it in a specific way, as I mentioned before, as it does have some attack actions and it has a very solid attack modifier deck through its perks as well. All right, it's time to talk about some cards. Our first up card here is Bewildering Instrumental. Top is our first song. It requires 1 note to play, in this case a high note, which is the lowest cost possible. You have a couple of 1-note songs at level 1, which means that these are possible to play on turn 1 immediately with no note generation because you do start the snare with a note of your choice. This one lasts for this turn plus the next 3, as at the end of the round, each of your songs will tick down by 1. So notably not at the end of your turn, but at the end of the entire round, once all characters and monsters have gone. So this one is also notable because it's our first song of many that gives us specific instructions on who to affect. In this case, it'll target the highest current hit point value monster, causing them to suffer 1 true damage and gain muddle. So this will happen 4 times over the next 4 rounds at the end of each of your turns. So overall, this is a fairly medium effect because it will never pick off low health enemies unless they are the only monster left and they have 1 health. And of course, Muddle is a fairly nebulous value. It gets better if you have something like Curse in your party, of course, in order to try and draw out those curses. And you do have decent access to Curse yourself as well. So with a focused party, this can be a decent song. But overall, as one of your 1-note songs, fairly middle of the road, and definitely not something that we've ever felt like we've needed specifically. So it kind of straddles that line between a main deckable card and a card that'll kind of sit in your sideboard or your side deck at level 1, depending on what your party needs. This does have its places and is particularly good to bring in for certain scenarios, especially against hordes of low health monsters such as vermlings, forest imps, or giant vipers, for example. But overall, a fairly weak effect. Initiative at 11 here is great and fast. However, this is not unique for this class. In fact, at level 1, this class has 7 cards that are between the initiatives of 0 and 20. So you'll actually want to be on the lookout for any cards in the back quarter of the spectrum instead, as they are definitely more rare, as I mentioned in the introduction. Bottom this card is a move 3, and then you grant an adjacent ally 1 shield for the round. This is a fine action, but sometimes the shield will go to waste, as many of your bottom actions that produce music notes don't actually move you. In addition, as mentioned before, generally you don't care about as being near monsters as other classes. So there'll be times where your music note is something like 4 or 5 hexes away from the nearest ally, and therefore, even with the move 3, can't get adjacent to them. So depending on your playstyle, this action will be reasonable or just a move 3, which is a bit below par as it doesn't make or generate any music notes either. The other card at level 1 here is Call to Action. Top is our first grant action, gives an ally within range 3 a move 3, and then a melee attack 2, and then you generate a low note for yourself, which of course can be used immediately. However, top action cards that produce notes are a little bit less value than bottom actions, as you do not have any bottom action songs on this class. Overall, this is a really nice bread and butter staple action. A grant ability that gives an ally both a move and a melee attack helps them position. It allows them to double up on 2 non-move actions on their own turn with coordination, spots you that free attack too, and of course it generates the all-important music notes we're going to need to actually form our songs with this class. This action is played very well in our party. It also has 3 different enhancement pips. So the range can be boosted on the grant action, the move can be bumped up to a move 4, and the attack can actually be enhanced with anything as it is a diamond enhancement pip. So it can take negative conditions as well. This is a really good candidate for enhancing, as it's a card you're likely going to pack with you for much of your music note career. It's a good staple card, and the bottom action, spoilers, is also quite good here as well. Initiative at 27 here is fairly poor for this class. You'll almost always want to pair this with a faster leading card so the ally can make best use of the grant from the top action. The bottom, however, doesn't care about speed as much, as it is a clean move 4, and one of your 4 move 4 is actually level 1. Ironically, you actually only have 2 moves that aren't move 4s on cards, so often not move on a turn, only to move 3 or 4 in the next. This also has a good enhancement pip on it, being a circle, so this can take +1, jump, or even an element for an ally. This class's access to jump is fairly nominal. You only have a couple cards that do it. So jump is a pretty good enhancement here, again, because I think this card will often stay in many music notes decks for much of your career. Next, we have Dissonant Rhythm. This top is, I would argue, the opposite of Bewildering Instrumental, needing 3 music notes total, consisting of 1 high note and 2 low notes, which is definitely a hefty cost. However, it does give you an attack to push to pierce to, targeting the enemy closest to you at the end of this and your next 2 turns. So you get 3 of these attacks total. And since it targets the enemy closest to you, but doesn't actually specify a range, this will often be something like a range 4 or range 5 ability. The nice thing about this ability is it doesn't miss provided you have line of sight. It will just target the closest thing. So you should be able to very easily get the full value out of this song, which is always nice because some songs you won't necessarily always get value out of on a given turn. So this is very consistent that way. This is probably the easiest way for this class to flip an attack modifier on each turn as well. And as mentioned, a lot of their perks while leveling up make your attack modifier deck very potent indeed. The Pierce on this action also helps to stay relevant at higher difficulty levels, and the push makes it so that you can push monsters away from a trap or difficult terrain, or even away from an ally. So the combination of the attack, the push 2, and the Pierce 2 really makes this a nice cohesive package. While this may be a hard song to play, it has been well worth it in our party in particular, as the music note attack modifiers, as mentioned, are very good. And this class doesn't attack a lot, which makes this a little bit more valuable as well. It also gives 2 experience, which is notable. The songs do vary in how much experience they give you. They typically all give you at least 1, but some will give you extra depending on how hard they are to play. So a 3-note song here giving 2 experience makes sense. Initiative at 14 here is reasonably fast, and the top may be something you want to put up early on in a round to try and finish off a monster nearest to you if it is low on health. Otherwise, the top doesn't really care as much, while the bottom definitely wants to go quickly. Bottom is a muddle, 3 targets within range 3, and then it makes a low note for you. This is a fairly low impact play, but is an easy way to make a note, as muddling 1 to 2 targets is typically going to be fine. Hitting 3 targets may be difficult, as this is a bottom action, and you're often a decent distance away from the fight itself. You'll need to run probably something like, I would say, 6 note generators minimum at level 1, with a balance between low and high notes. So this is likely an inclusion due to the fact that it's a very solid top song and a bottom note generator for you. Other card here is Increased Cadence. Top is a simple attack to range 4 muddle that makes a high note. So it's a good way to flip an attack modifier, actually typically damage something, and make a note, as well as a little bit of muddle in there for some defensive capability. This class has a good balance between top and bottom note generation at level 1, with bottom note generation, as mentioned, being slightly more valuable as it allows you to play a song in the same turn with them. So this will be best when paired with planning on playing a 2 or 3 note song in the next turn, so kind of as an off turn, when you don't have enough notes to play a song anyways. Initiative at 32 here is awkward for the top, being a little bit too slow to be a reliable way to actually impact the battlefield and actually before the monsters go, whereas the bottom generally doesn't really care at all, as it is a semi-persistent loss. So the bottom, as mentioned, is a loss. At the end of this and your next 5 turns, gain 1 note of your choice in addition to any other notes gained. This is one of very few ways to actually generate more than 1 music note per turn. I will make special mention of each of these, as there's only 3 of them, and you only have access to 2 of them for much of your career, as the other one comes at level 9. So for us, this was actually surprisingly vital early on in our music notes career, because it is one of the only ways to make more than 1 music note a turn. So if you're interested in more of the 2 and 3 note songs, I would highly recommend putting this up fairly early on in the scenario as probably your only early round loss, and then maybe another loss or 2 in the back half of the scenario, as getting an additional note on this turn and the next 5 turns for 6 total was huge in actually being able to set up multiple high impact songs like in the same rest cycle. So definitely recommend this one, and the top half is perfectly serviceable as well. You are an 11 card hand, so playing a loss or 2 early on will give you plenty of stamina to finish out a scenario, and I do view this as something that is quite important early on, particularly if you do not have the perk that allows you to essentially maintain 1 note, because by default, as you play a song, you do lose any remaining notes. There is a perk that I'd recommend taking early on. It's a single perk mark that essentially when you spend your notes to make a song, you gain 1 additional note of your choice at the end of the turn. So you essentially kind of hold over 1, but it even generates 1 for you, even if you don't have any music notes left over. So similar to this persistent loss, but when combined with the persistent loss, makes it very easy to get the notes you need for your songs. Next up, we have intensifying amplitude. Top is, in my opinion, a decent bit worse than increasing cadence top, but otherwise very similar, as it's an attack 1 range 3 wound that makes a low note. So you trade 1 damage and most notably 1 range for wound, as well as losing muddle. The difference between making a low or a high note here will ultimately likely be the deciding factor in terms of which of these 2 cards is more useful for you. So this is one of the situations where you likely need to lay out the other cards you plan on playing and make sure you have the right notes for your songs. We will say that range 4 is definitely preferable in this class compared to range 3, as range 3 is often fairly easy to get hit from monsters in that range, especially from like ranged monsters with multi-target abilities. So that's part of why I prefer cadence over amplitude here in a vacuum. Wound is good, but losing a damage or range and muddle for it is a pretty steep cost. Initiative at 56 here is another knock against the card, a bad initiative for both a wound and an attack. Although once again, the bottom is a semi-persistent loss that really doesn't care about initiative much. Bottom, as mentioned, is a loss. it on the ally's next 5 attacks, add plus X, or X's number of used slots the character token has passed. So the first time this ability triggers, you gain nothing from it, 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it falls off. This was used once in testing and then promptly put to the side to try other cards, as it was very underwhelming for us, unfortunately. The fact that the first attack gains nothing, and this only gives cumulative 10 damage in a perfect world where none of the damage is wasted, with a high potential for some of the damage to go to waste by overkilling monsters or lining up on the wrong kind of attacks, means that without very strong sequencing, this will generally not feel too great for a loss. I do feel the other losses for this class, ones that help with songs, give you hard crowd control, are going to be preferable for many players, as this is just very feels like a middle of the road style loss that was very common in first edition and less so in second edition, as this really doesn't have a lot to do with the class. Its best niche is probably when paired with your upcoming cards that strengthen and bless your allies. Um, as a single target ally will have struggled to actually make use of these 5 attacks in a timely manner. Whereas if you have like an area damage dealer, this does get a little better, but really you're only getting 4 attacks with impact on them, and much of that rides in the last 2 attacks. So if your allies do something like pull a null or a curse on the last attack or 2, the bulk of this card is going to be wasted. It definitely won't feel like a very potent loss at all in that case. Next up is Marching Beat. Top is a strengthen 2 targets within range 3, and then you make a high note. This has a ton of flexibility to it and can even target yourself, as it doesn't say ally. So this is very solid. As a top action, range 3 is totally serviceable and generally won't be too much of an issue, as you can always move into range. This makes a high note, which is very important. If this was a bottom, I'd be more worried about actually having targets. But at the top, this is very easy to leverage. And double strengthen is very powerful in specific party compositions, but is also generally pretty useful. Um, for our current party composition, we have a Spellweaver, 3 Spears, and Cthulhu or Squidface. So we have a lot of people attacking. So this is particularly potent on Spellweaver. My own character has really leveraged my attack modifier deck, as I am a high level. I'm level 6 currently on Spellweaver. So I have a lot of +2s in my deck. So the strength has often been something like 4 or 6 extra bonus damage on my bigger turns when I'm attacking many monsters in rapid succession. So Marching Beat, generally very good, but is even better in the right party composition. And of course, it generates that key music note. And I also like that both halves of this card generate music note as well. Initiative 21 here is again nothing to write home about, but is reasonably fast. It is occasionally awkward sometimes where your abilities go a little bit slower than your allies. However, they can at least leverage the strength in on the next turn as well. So bottom might be one of Music Note's best non-loss level 1 actions. It gives an ally within range 3 a move 4 ability, and then generates a low note. This is a very potent action that also generates a note as a bottom, so it's kind of the best of all the various worlds here. When combined with the move 3 attack 2 grant action that we saw earlier, so that's call to actions top. You can give an ally a cumulative move 7, attack 3 on a turn. So you can kind of slingshot them into the next room and have them perform an attack and then still get their full turn. Only downside of that combination is you do waste one of the 2 notes, of course, because both halves generate a note and you can only make 1 per turn. But overall, this is a great way to give allies that maybe have less mobility a really good move action that doesn't take up their own turn. And again, it generates a note for you. Range 3 can be a little awkward at times, but that's kind of the sweet spot as to roughly where you want to end up. You want to be close enough to your allies to affect them with your abilities that are often range 3, but far enough away from the monsters that you're not in danger either. So overall, I really like Marching Beat. I think it's one of your best level 1 cards, period. Whereas for intensifying amplitude, I actually view this as probably the weakest overall level 1 card, or at least bottom 3 for me. So kind of 2 ends of the spectrum here. I do think this card has its place. I think that Wound is pretty valuable. I just don't like how less effective the rest of the action is, tied with a poor initiative, tied with what I view as also your worst loss at level 1. For Mobilizing Measure, this is another single note song. At the end of each of your turns, grant the ally closest to you a move 2 action, and this lasts this turn and the next 3 for 4 total. This is probably your strongest single note song for quite a while, depending on card choice at level 2, as I think there is a level 2 card that is pretty comparable, and then there's a level 7 song that is probably better than this as far as single note songs. Giving the closest ally a move to 4 turns in a row at the end of your turn is great to allow allies to continue to move forward without having to spend their own actions to do so, as mentioned on our previous grant cards. Do note that your songs tick down at the end of the round. Many actions such as this one give you the ability at the end of your turn. So allies who go after you in a given round can use their new positioning to their advantage right away. So overall, this is a pretty good song and one of my favorites for a single note, which is pretty important. Initiative at 8 here is great and is your second fastest at level 1. This has definitely come up where an ally needs to be in a different spot. So with a communication and a single low note, you can get them in the right spot and continue to provide value for them or someone else over the next 3 turns. Bottom is similar to Bewildering Instrumentals, so it's a move 3 with additional upside, this time giving an adjacent ally 1 melee retaliate, which is typically a bit worse than 1 shield. However, this is also a jump, so this definitely has value as you have no other access to jump at level 1 without items, and won't get another jump card for quite some time. So move 3 jump alone at this initiative will probably be worth bringing, and it's tied to probably your best single note song as well. So I imagine this will be a card many music notes bring in, especially at level 1. Next card here is Power Ballad. It is a 3-note song, requires 2 high and 1 low note. You and each ally add +1 attack to your first attack each turn. This is identical in both name and effect to a first edition card. However, as this costs 3 music notes now, in particular 2 high and 1 low, this is definitely a tough sell. You're essentially going to want to leverage as many of these bonus attacks on any given turn as possible. And this also includes yourself. So you're going to want to really be having every ally perform at least 1 attack on this turn and the next 3 turns. So it requires a decent amount of coordination. It also doesn't help area attacks at all, as it only impacts the first attack each character makes each turn. So that can be some awkwardness there. It essentially wants to spread out attacks from you and all your allies. And the reality is that sometimes your allies have to be doing other things. Maybe they need a long rest. Maybe they need to do a support action. Maybe you have allies with fewer attacks and just simply can't attack that often. Maybe the combat for the room you're in ends sooner than expected. So the last turn or 2 of this is between rooms where it doesn't actually have any impact. There's quite a few ways for Power Ballad to kind of go wrong, which isn't ideal for a 3-note song because they're much harder to set up. Overall, this has been fine, just not particularly impressive for its cost for us, essentially. Initiative at 12 here is good and fast, and definitely important for the top, as if you don't go before your allies in a given round, that first turn of this is essentially wasted. Once again, the bottom doesn't care much as it is a move action. In this case, it's another one of those move 4s, again with the circle enhancement pip to really take whatever you need here. Jump is always a solid option on these kinds of cards. So overall, Power Ballads has 2 reasonable halves and a good initiative. Mobilizing Measure having, again, really good top song, great initiative, and a medium bottom half. So I view these cards at a pretty similar power level, and think you'll probably bring most musicals will bring in both of these cards at least at level 1. Next, we have Singing Arrow. Top is an attack to range 3 curse that makes a high note. I like this one quite a bit, as you have perks that add in additional curses as well, and another card upcoming does too. Curses need a decent bit of density to them to really make them consistent, and having reasonable access to curse also makes muddle or other sources of disadvantage much stronger as well. This is a good bread and butter action that generates a note, provides a bit offensively and defensively to your party, kind of all in one action. If I had anything to complain about this card, it'd probably be the range 3, as again, range 3 is definitely harder to pull off than range 4, but as a top action, this is a pretty reasonable ask overall. Initiative at 85 here is very important, as it is your second latest card at level 1, and is one of your few late initiatives overall. I would bring in at least one, if not two, late initiatives on pretty much any Soothsinger build. So definitely keep this card in mind when looking at your level 1 choices. Bottom is another grant ability. You grant an ally within range 3 and attack 2 range 3 that also makes a low note for you. This is absolute value packed for a bottom action and is as good as the top has been for a clear favorite of the party. This is so easy to pull off with proper positioning the turn before. Bottom actions are very valuable, especially those that make music notes. This is a bottom attack, so even more valuable from an ally's deck, maybe someone that you've strengthened or given blesses to, things like that. So Singing Arrow is probably my pick for the best non-song action at level 1, as I like it both halves a lot. Both notes make a music note, and it has a rare late initiative. So very cohesive, strong package here for this card. Next one up is Tuning the Outcome. Top is bless 2 targets within range 3, and then you make a low note. This has been also very solid. It also allows you to target yourself because, again, this doesn't say ally for one of the 2 blesses. So this is pretty flexible. You essentially only need 1 ally within range 3 to really make the best use of this. 2 allies, of course, being great. This is also notable that it's a top action that makes a low note, and its bottom action makes a high note. It is usually the other way around. So this has a little bit of versatility and uniqueness there, but this will become more common at higher levels as well. Initiative at 44 here is definitely unfortunate, but overall neither half needs to go a particular speed, so at least there's that. Another thing to call it with the top is top of tuning the outcome works really well with marching beats double strengthen. So if you're tuning the outcome on a turn and then marching beat on the subsequent turn, you've basically given them advantage and blessed to the same 2 targets because they both have the same range and targeting restrictions. So there's some nice synergy there as well between your cards. Bottom action here is a curse within range 3 that, as mentioned before, makes a high note. This is a nice little value action. Again, it rewards proper positioning as it is a bottom action that needs to be within range 3 of a monster target. This is a little bit harder than being within range 3 of an ally, as this puts you closer to the action. However, a curse and a high note on the bottom of a card will often be worth the trouble, as our music note has had a little bit more trouble making high notes than low notes, just based on his card choices and play style. So something to keep in mind as well. Overall, I think that these are both very solid cards. As mentioned, I think Singing Arrow is definitely top 3 or possibly top 1 for me, whereas Tuning the Outcome is probably roughly top 5, maybe top 7, and I think will make the majority of music note builds simply due to the fact that it does blesses and curses and makes a music note on both sides, just like Singing Arrow. These are cards to look out for where they have good staple actions that make your strong, important music notes, and often bottoms that make music notes are just very important for this class as well. Wearying Chant. This is another song, costs 2 notes, 1 high and 1 low note. At the end of each of your turns, the closest enemy to you that does not have disarm or stun gains disarm. This one has been really solid as a double note song. It essentially disarms the closest monster, but is worded to make sure it is never wasted on those that already have disarm or stun, which is great. 2 disarms over 2 turns is great value, and it's been clutch in keeping us alive on key turns where we're running out of health, as our party does not actually have a lot of healing, so the disarm kind of functions like that for us. One thing I will note with this class is that your experience generation is very good. You'll gain experience from all of your songs in varying amounts and also from losses. So kind of regardless of your playstyle, you should get pretty good experience generation on this class. This has probably been our 2nd highest experience class, or maybe 3rd, as Tinkerer has also been really high on experience, who our Cthulhu was playing previously. But this is definitely up in the upper echelon of classes so far for us for gaining experience. Initiative at 19 here is a tiny bit slow for a reactive disarm ability, but will generally be fast enough, and it is pretty easy to pair this with something a bit faster for security if you're worried about it. Bottom is also pretty nice here, as it is your only access to healing at level 1. It's a heal 2, ranged 3 that makes a low note, so this is a good, solid action. Range 3 is slightly limiting, but shouldn't be too punishing. the heal 2 being slightly below average, but normal for a bottom action, and the music note really tying the room together and making this a very solid card, as I like both halves, and it has a reasonable initiative here. I think unless your party is very defensively minded, you probably want Worrying Chant between the double disarm and the heal bottom that makes a music note for you. Next card here is Defensive Ditty. This is our first X card. This is a double high note song that gives you and all allies 1 shield for this round as well as the next. We were initially really excited for this card. However, with it being a double high note, it can be difficult to pull off sometimes, and the song falls off very quickly, as it only lasts 2 turns, and one of those is the turn you play it. So in our experience, this has actually ended up being one of the weaker songs at level 1, although it can be good in scenarios with hordes of monsters, which is usually where our music note actually brings it in. And the 1 shield on the right turns can be very powerful against those hordes of monsters. Things like vermlings, giant vipers, hounds, things like that, even living bones because of their multi-target abilities. Initiative at 9 here is vital for the top, as if you go slowly with the card, you essentially waste half the value, as a single turn of shields for the party is absolutely not worth it for the 2 high notes. Once again, the bottom does not care about initiative as much, as it is another one of the move 4s. I generally recommend running something like 2 or 3 of the move 4s on this class at level 1, plus either of the move 3s. So this will generally be a pretty easy cut, unless you want to bring it in for the top half, for heavily packed monster scenarios, or perhaps cutting one of your move 4s instead. So overall, I think Worrying Chant is in the top half of cards, whereas I think Defensive Ditty is probably bottom 3, bottom 5 for me. Next X card is Echoing Aria. This is another song. This one costs 2 low notes, so the opposite of Defensive Ditty before it, and it gives you and all allies Retaliate 1, range 2. This to me has actually felt the exact opposite of Defensive Ditty. I was initially very unimpressed with the idea of this card, but the fact that this one is generally easier to play, as we found low notes easier to produce than high notes, as well as lasting twice as long at 4 full rounds instead of 2 rounds on Defensive Ditty, has actually made this a huge deal. I feel like we typically get something like 8, sometimes 10 damage out of this song over those 4 rounds, which is really solid value when it's all true damage on an easy to repeat song. This will often polish off monsters that have barely survived our attacks or things like that. Range 2 retaliate over the more common melee retaliate is also big, as even ranged monsters often get hit by it, as they'll move backwards to avoid disadvantage and go to exactly range 2 much of the time and still trigger this ability. Initiative at 5 here is your absolute fastest. In fact, for your entire career as Music Note, and it's such a nice boon for the top half to make sure you get value out of all 4 turns as much as possible. Bottom is a reasonable attack 1, range 4, loot 1 that makes a high note. Of course, this is fairly low impact a lot of the time, but it does flip an attack modifier, generates a note. The loot action will occasionally get you a coin or 2. I do appreciate that as long as you make the attack or the loot action, you get the music note, as sometimes you'll only be able to do one of the 2 actions, although at range 4, this attack shouldn't be too hard to pull off. So overall, pretty easy way to generate a note, but of course not the strongest action. But it's a fine action combined with what in our experience has been a very solid song with your fastest initiative possible, makes this card a pretty big standout for me when I was initially not very high on the card. So it is quite nice to see. Our last level 1 and X card here is Provoke Terror. This is a loss. It is a push 2, range 4 that stuns the targets in a triangle plus formation. So triangle plus 1 extra monster next to of the targets, and then it generates a high note. So you'll be able to hit 2 or 3 targets with this a decent amount of the time, but do note that you do have to push each target at least 1 hex to stun them, as the stun is tied to the push action. That's why it's in the bubbled portion with the range 4 here. It also makes a low note, which is definitely important to put up a song on the following turn. Overall, this is a reasonable loss. It can be a bit clunky at times, as needing to push the targets to get the stun, which is the primary draw to this, a little bit less clear cut as something that might be a bit more consistent that just like stuns 3 targets within range 4, of course, or something like that. Initiative 89 here is great in general for this class. It's definitely awkward in playing the top for the loss, but works generally fine at the bottom, as the bottom is our last move 4 here. So this card will be a move 4 at initiative 89 a large portion of the time. And then when things line up, you can stun 2 to 4 targets at the top, make a music note, typically going faster in a given round with the card. So I find Provoke Terror will usually sit either as maybe your last couple playables or the first couple cuts, kind of right in that midpoint there, where it'll depend on your exact build. But as far as the move 4s go, I think it is a reasonable one, and the loss has performed fine for us overall as well. So for level 1 card choices, as mentioned before, you'll need to bring a mixture of songs with different note costs, both high and low note generation, as well as roughly 3 to 4 of your move actions total. You'll also want at least one slow initiative, as you should have no issues going quickly in a round, at least at level 1, almost essentially regardless of your card choices, as you have 7 fast initiatives. So as far as suggestions on cards to cut, I think Bewildering Instrumental here, the very first card, looks like a pretty solid cut to me. It's a medium song and a medium move action. Normally its initiative would be a big selling point, but this class goes so fast easily, so no part of this card looks critical to me on this class. I see it as more of a sideboard card that you bring in for certain scenarios, as mentioned against hordes of low health monsters. Um, Another reasonable cut here is Intensifying Amplitude. It's my pick for the weakest card overall. It's a decent but not exciting top action that generates a note, and a bottom loss that doesn't really synergize with anything Music Note is trying to do in particular, although it is a fairly supporting action, as it offers ramping damage for your allies, but it does take forever to get to the good part, the 3 and the 4, unless you have allies making many attacks in a single round, and it's also easy to have some of that damage go to waste. I also really don't like that the first 2 attacks essentially have very little impact, as you get +0 and +1 on them, respectively. Another pick for a decent choice for cut are Defensive Ditty and Echoing Aria. Not everyone likes Retaliate for Echoing Aria, even though it is ranged, and the bottom action is just a reasonable way to generate notes. I do think that of the two, I prefer Echoing Aria, as the song lasts so much longer, whereas Defensive Ditty, it feels like it should be a very powerful card, but just really hasn't been for us in practice because it has such a short duration for a song, and it has the double high note song cost to it. This is one of your move 4s, so you're going to have to really look at your other move 4s, such as Provoke Terror, Power Ballad, and Call to Action to see which ones you want to run. I generally lean towards running Call to Action and Provoke Terror at minimum, and then Power Ballad's right on that range for me as to whether or not I cut it or not, and then I find Defensive Today to be the weakest of the move 4s. So for me, that's part of why I recommend cutting at least one of these two, unless your party really needs a lot of defensive action. You can also pretty safely cut really any of these because you have a bunch of move 4s and 2 move 3s on top of it. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is cutting 1 or 2 of these move actions feels pretty safe to me. If you are confident in your note generation and planning, you could also cut Increasing Cadence. At the end of this and your next 5 turns, generate a note of your choice. However, I would not recommend this unless you have the perk that allows you to generate an additional note whenever you play a song at minimum, because otherwise I feel like you're going to struggle to actually play 2 and 3 note songs with any sort of timeliness behind them, because you're therefore limited to only 1 note per turn. Aside from that, I think the rest of the cards are pretty high quality. So there's nothing else that really jumps out to me as being an obvious cut. So as mentioned, I think the 3Xs are all on the chopping block. Of them, I like Provoke Terror and Echoing Aria the best. And then for the level 1s with potential cuts, I think Bewildering Instrumental, Intensifying Amplitude, and Increasing Cadence are the easiest to cut or potentially power ballad. Um, Again, I would not recommend cutting cadence unless you have the perk that allows you to generate an additional note. As far as starting items go, this class is actually fairly item agnostic as well. There are, of course, items that help it, but there's also a lot of the starting items that are fairly low impact for them. And unfortunately, many of the starting items are just not particularly conducive to this play style. So that does kind of hinder it a little bit. So I'll suggest a couple reasonable pickups, but there isn't really like a big standout for this class in particular. Stamina Potion is probably the most solid overall for many classes that have persistent non-losses, as you can stop playing a song and then pick it back up with a Stamina Potion and do it right away, potentially for the other half, or even restart the song as it falls off. Wing shoes and weathered boots are a great pickup for you, as you are a fairly low mobility class unless you're playing a lot of your move fours. You have less move actions than other classes, as over half of your level 1 and X cards only have the default move 2 available to them. So I think boots are probably the easiest generic choice on this class, either +1 or jump depending. In a vacuum, I probably lean towards the +1 weathered boots, um, as then at least your basic moves are move 3s when you tap them, when you use it as a spent item. But overall, I can definitely see a case where wing shoes are good too, because jump is something that, again, you only have one card that you have access to early on. If you plan on focusing on the attack part of this class, Simple Bow could be a reasonable pickup to gain advantage on a range attack by spending it. Although do note that Dissonant Rhythm's song attack is considered melee and therefore doesn't work with this item, which may be your more consistent way of attacking. Your other ways of attacking are things like Intensifying Amplitudes top, Singing Arrows top, things like that that are actually ranged. Leather armor is always pretty good, as you'll probably get attacked occasionally, but with only 6 life, preventing any and all damage is helpful, and turning something like an attack 4 into an attack 2 or 3 may even end up saving you a card with only 6 life. So leather armor is probably a solid choice because of many of these items don't work particularly well for you. Amulet of Life, a spent item that gives you a heal oneself, is always reasonable, cleanses annoying ailments such as wound and poison, and turns your long rest into a cumulative heal 3, a heal 1, and a heal 2, respectively, so it's hard to go wrong with that kind of item. Aside from that, nothing really jumps out to me, so I don't think there's a ton of pressure on you there. Um, and I will say that the first couple prosperity unlocks definitely help you, because there's a lot of decent items that show up, just not at the beginning of the game, which is fine because this is a locked class and you will likely be Prosperity 2 by the time you unlock this class anyways. At level 2, our first option is Onward to Battle. Top is a grant action. You grant one ally within range 3 a melee attack 4, and then you make a high note. This is a pretty hefty attack compared to Call to Action's grant action from level 1 that was a move 3 attack 2. However, of course, this doesn't grant a move action, so your ally already needs to be in the right position. Provided your party has some sort of front line or possibly like a summon or two, it should be pretty easy to accomplish, but will fail some amount of the time, although it's going to be fairly rare unless all of your allies are ranged. Both the range of the grant action and the attack itself can be enhanced, and the attack can take any negative condition as a diamond, a +1, or even an element, so this is a pretty flexible card. Overall, a good bread and butter action that makes a keynote for you as well. Initiative at 91 here is stellar. It's the latest offered so far and is one of only 3 very late initiatives this class has offered. It doesn't work particularly well with the top, although it can react to your allies' new positions near the end of the round to try and get a hit off. If all of your allies are near monsters when you're choosing your leading card, however, it's probably better to pair this with a faster card when using the top. Thankfully, the bottom doesn't care about going slow at all, as it's a rock solid move 5, another good enhancement pip that can take jump. Overall, this card has 3 solid dimensions to it, 2 good halves, and a great and much needed late initiative, especially if you aren't running Provoke Terror as a second late card, as I think many music notes will run Singing Arrow as their one late card at level 1. Other option here is Soothing Lullaby. Top is another song. It's also very important that it's a single high note in order to perform the song. At the end of each of your turns, perform Heal 1, targeting all. So for this and the the 2 next turns, 3 turns total. You and all allies gain 1 health. Um, do note that this says heal all, but healing all by default only targets, like positive conditions and heals only target allies. So this does not mean the monsters heal, thankfully. This is potentially a very needed ability depending on your party composition, as constant repeatable healing is a great option for many and gets rid of pesky poisons and wounds easily as well. The fact that you can just fire this off in almost any given turn as it only costs a single note means it's easy to react to a bad round of combat as well and start topping up your allies. This is one of your very few ways to actually heal, so definitely notable there. Initiative at 20 here is honestly a little awkward. I lean towards putting this up late in a round if you're early on in a room or scenario, and then quicker than this, ideally faster than 15 if your party is already quite damaged. So either way, you're likely pairing this with a different number, although 20 is reasonably fast and may not be significantly different than 15 or 14 on an average round. It's just that's kind of the sweet spot for going before many monster attacks. Bottom creates a delayed ability. Place a character token on a monster within range 3. At the end of that enemy's turn this round, remove your token. That enemy gains disarm, and this makes a low note. This is definitely a little awkward, as you may not always be within range 3 of the right monster to disarm, and the fact that they still get their attack this turn means that this is definitely a little finicky. The monster still needs to be alive on the next turn and needs to have pulled an attack action on their ability card for this to actually be effective, as it does not affect them this turn. Overall, this is fine, but nothing too crazy, as we have had a disarm song since level 1 that is easier to pull off as it disarms at the end of your turn and happens twice. Of course, it's a song, so it's costing notes instead of this one providing notes. And this is a bottom action, which definitely has some value to it. Overall, I lean towards this card, again, having 2 solid halves, although I prefer the top to the bottom, and a worse but still fine initiative compared to Onward to Battle. So as far as level 2 card choice, I think Onward to Battle is a very simple, good option with 2 great bread and butter actions and a fantastic initiative, whereas Soothing Lullaby has a great song option and a reasonable but not exciting initiative, and a pretty swingy bottom option that'll either be great or just make a low note depending on the situation, and there's definitely some luck involved there as well. So I think this will often boil down to whether or not your party needs the mass healing that Soothing Lullaby provides. If so, Lullaby is great and is probably worth the pickup. Otherwise, I do lean towards Onward to Battle for its versatility and much needed late initiative for this class. At level 3, our first option is Ode to the Gambler. This is another song. This one costs 2 notes, so 1 high and 1 low note. You and each ally may individually choose after revealing the card to treat the first attack modifier card drawn each turn as rolling. This lasts for 4 rounds total, this and the next 3 rounds. This can result in some pretty crazy situations, as many modifiers are not meant to be rolling, such as your ×2 multiplier in the base deck. But of course, as the name implies, this has some risk to it as well, as you could roll into a -2 or even your null, depending on your luck. This is best with high-level characters that have a more consistent perk deck, as well as any and all sources of advantage and or strengthen, which makes this a pretty low-risk ability. This can absolutely pump out damage, but does have some ask to it. So I would say this is a pretty moderate with low-level allies and no source or low sources of advantage and strengthen. So this ends up being a bit more party specific, but it does last 4 full rounds, so it can lead to a lot of value. Initiative at 15 here is solid, but nothing crazy at this point. However, this is better the sooner in the round you put it up for the top action. So coordination with allies is pretty key here to make sure you go before them when you choose to put this song up. Bottom is going to look pretty familiar, move 5 with a nice enhancement pip. If you didn't take Onward to Battle at the previous level or aren't running a lot of your move 4s, this is probably going to be a nice and important pickup. But I would say this doesn't carry the card by itself, as it is fairly replaceable between move 4s and move 5s, and you having a decent amount of them. So you're going to want the song half some portion of the time before I'm taking this card or recommending this card for you. Other option at level 3 is Symphonic Medley. Top is a move 2, and then an attack 3 range 2 that makes a low note. This is a fantastic action. Normally the range 2 on the attack would be a concern for me, but the move 2 before it makes it really easy to use. And of course, top move actions are very valuable. Um, on top of that, the move and the attack's range have enhancement pips, which are both reasonably cheap to enhance, even as a level 3 card. So putting this up to a move 3, and then a range 3, or range 2 attack 3, or a move 2 attack 3 range 3 makes this a great way to make this card very consistent with some spare gold. Initiative at 62 here is definitely awkward for the top, as this class basically never wants to go in the middle of a round when they have no control over whether or not they go before or after monsters or allies. But your initiative control is reasonable enough where this isn't a huge deal. It's easy to pair this with a fast card. Bottom is a very powerful loss. Do note that it has the cannot be recovered icon here, so it cannot be recovered with something like a Tinkerer ally, and for good reason. You may immediately play up to 3 cards from your hand to perform one 1-note action, one 2-note action, and one 3-note action, ignoring the note requirements of those actions. So this allows you to play 3 full songs immediately as extra actions on the turn, in addition to your top action, fully ignoring the note requirements of those cards. This has been an insanely explosive round 1 action for our music notes, particularly when the first room looks like it's going to be a difficult scenario, as it essentially allows you to turbocharge your first full rest cycle's worth of songs all into one action. And there's some really cool combinations you can do with this. And this action scales so well as you gain more levels and gain access to more songs. It's been a very effective play for us. It effectively giving you 6 music notes and 3 full cards of action for a single loss. It is also another big reason to run a good mix of songs that cost a varying amount of notes, as you need one of each of the common note costs. You won't see a 4-note song until level 9, and this card doesn't work with it anyways, so kind of a moot point here. Essentially, every song except for that one costs 1, 2, or 3 notes. This has been very powerful and is one of our music notes favorite cards thus far, as we often melt the first room of a scenario due to it, as is very common turn 1 plays to put up the bottom half of this card. Our music notes favorite combination with this so far is Ode to the Gambler, Dissonant Rhythm, and Mobilizing Measure. So the song we just looked at for the rolling modifiers for everyone, the Attack 2, Push 2, Pierce 2 song from level 1, and then the free move 2 for an ally as the last song. So for level 3 card choice, I do think both cards are great and have done good work for our party. In a vacuum, if you're only taking one of these, I lean towards Symphonic Medley for its absolute stable top action and very powerful and honestly class-changing bottom loss. However, I think at high levels and with good sources of advantage and strengthen, that Ode to the Gambler can lead to some absurd turns. Our music note has actually taken both of these cards and uses them together for great effect, as mentioned. So I would take a look at the level 4s and see what you think of them, as taking one now and coming back at level 4 is totally fine if you're not a huge fan of those cards. And in particular, our music note really wanted to leverage the attack-focused sub-build. So I think both of these cards are important for that sub-build, but in particular Ode to the Gambler. Level 4, our first option is Alluring Serenade. It is a song that costs 2 low notes. At the end of each of your turns, perform a pull 3, range 5 curse for this turn and the next 2 turns, so 3 turns total. So 3 curses and 3 pulls is fine, but relatively unexciting for a double note level 4 song. You do need to actually pull the target at least 1 hex to get the curse, so similar to our area stun loss from Provoke Terror at level 1, as the curse is bubbled into the range part of the pull action. So there is a chance for you to not be able to pull and therefore curse the target, which does fully waste the action, although that won't be super common as this is range 5. My concern is more so that you want a party who can actually leverage the pulls to make this feel good, as otherwise this is simply 3 curses for a level 4 song, which isn't ideal. It's fine, but you really need to be leveraging curses and disadvantage slash muddle a lot in your party to make this good in that kind of situation. So again, like the last couple songs, I feel like this is more party specific. Initiative at 24 here is thoroughly medium and not great at this point, as you have so many cards in the 5 to 20 range, as well as other options at this level. And the bottom likes to go quickly, so initiative 24 here definitely not ideal. Bottom is a heal 3, range 3, pull 3 that makes a high note. Of course, this targets the person you're healing, which is a little bit unusual, but is a good solid action. The combination of range 4 and pull 3 means you're probably able to save an ally from a bad situation, top up their health, and make a fairly rare bottom uh, action that is a high note. This would definitely be notable. However, our other card at level 4 also makes a high note with its bottom action, which is kind of funny because we've actually only had 3 cards total that have done that up to this point. Other level 4 card is Hymn of the Oak. Top is a rock solid ward to targets within range 3 that makes a low note. Ward often saves roughly 2 to 3 life by this level, depending on difficulty, which makes this action pretty reasonable when you can do it every rest cycle, as well as getting notes from your own songs as well. I like Ward a lot in second edition, as it helps low health allies survive big hits without losing cards. So repeatable Ward that targets multiple people, including potentially yourself, feels great. This has a diamond plus enhancement pip, as well as a pip next to the target and range. But as this targets multiple people, any of these options are going to be fairly expensive on a level 4 card. With that being said, if you do have the money, great card to enhance. Initiative at 10 here is much better than Alluring Serenades 24, and is especially good when both halves of it are proactive and want to go before the monsters, so this is actually quite important here. Bottom grants all allies 1 shield and makes a high note. This does not give yourself a shield as you are not your own ally, but does get all allies aside from you regardless of range. As mentioned before, you really shouldn't be the focus of attacks often on this class, so ends up being a pretty solid action, and ends up being similar to the top in terms of what it does to prevent damage. The key is that both make different notes, so either way, you're helping your team and getting notes for future songs. Of course, a bottom action that makes a note is always a little better than a top action on this class. So for level 4 card choice, I really like Hymn of the Oak. Both sides are good defensive options that also give a note, which depending on your card choices at 2 and 3 may be much needed by now, as you may have taken songs at both previous levels. Alluring Serenade to me feels a little bit weaker, as I'm not a huge fan of the top and the initiative, so it's mostly a fine bottom action, but that feels pretty comparable to both options on Hymn of the Oak, as all 4 of these actions are all defensive and typically proactive in nature. So they end up feeling kind of similar. So when in that kind of situation, I lean towards the more consistent card with the better initiative, in this case, Hymn to the Oak. I also think it's perfectly fine to, as mentioned before, go back at this level to take the level 3 card that you didn't take previously, as neither of these options feel mandatory in any way and may be fairly skippable because they are defensive. If you are at a lower difficulty level, perhaps your party is really meshing well together offensively, you may not need these kind of cards and may want to go back for something else that's more explosive. Level 5, our first option here is Change Tempo. Top is an immobilized muddle within range 4 that targets 3 monsters in a triangle hex formation, and then also makes a high note. This is reminiscent of a couple different cards from first edition Music Note, as they had access to area disarm and later stun, and this is definitely a much more balanced version of that. So as an area mobilized muddle, hitting up to 3 targets at range 4 is great. This is kind of range 5 for 2 of the targets, as only one of the hexes targeting has to be within range 4, so you can kind of turn it. Immobilized plus muddle often means that the monsters will get a turn, but that turn may be less effective depending on whether or not they're ranged or area. And of course, for any truly melee monster actions, their full turn is wasted. So this is a more balanced version and a more fair version of the previous effects because there's some variance to it, but it will still be at least somewhat effective in most situations. Combined with this making a high note for you, this is such a fantastic staple action. It's hard to find too much to really complain about, but it isn't an absolute showstopper like the previous actions that simply disarmed or stunned. But I am very in favor of this change because it was frankly unfun to be playing next to a music note a lot of the time that simply prevented the monsters from doing anything. Part of the fun of this game is overcoming challenges, and it felt like the monsters weren't much of a challenge when they couldn't do anything, of course. So that was part of the balancing issues with first edition music note. Initiative at 25 here is definitely not ideal. However, as mentioned before, you can go quickly with this class, shouldn't really be a huge issue here. And 25 is serviceable when you can't. Um, Bottom is a curse within range 4, a bless within range 4, and then a low note, which is similar to the top, but of course weaker as it's a bottom action and can be easily combined with a song. I'm a big fan of any reasonable value actions on this class that provide music notes, which both halves of this card do, and bottom actions that do so get a bump for me, of course. And this provides a little bit of offensive and defensive value between the curse and the bless here. So I like both halves of change tempo a lot, held back by a moderate but not terrible initiative. Other option here is Thrilling Solo. The top is why I've been referencing the fact that there's definitely an attack focused sub build for your music note kind of floating around this time around, which is pretty exciting. So this is a 3-note song. You need a high and 2 low notes. Immediately after you perform the first attack ability from your ability cards each round, you may repeat that attack ability, adding +1 to the attack, and you may choose a new target. This, of course, is balanced by the fact the attack values on choices on this class are fairly limited, but getting a full copy of the ability with +1 attack for the next 4 turns is very powerful and deserving of the 3-note cost here. I know our own music note just recently got this card and is very excited to try this combo out, as this works really well with the free attack from Dissonant Rhythm, giving you an attack 2, push 2, pierce 2, followed by an attack 3, push 2, pierce 2 for 3 of the 4 turns if you have nothing else you want to copy instead. How do you get both these out together as they cost 2 and 3 notes, you might be asking? Symphonic Medleys, lost from level 3, of course, allows you to put up a 3, 2, and 1 song. 3, 2, and 1 note song of your choice for free. You do those 2 plus any 1 note song that you want, potentially the move or healing song to go with it. This is also great with actions like the Singing Arrows, attack 2 curse, or the top of Symphonic Medley for an attack 3 followed by an attack 4. Of course, if you aren't attacking as this class and playing more of a supporting role, then this card definitely isn't for you. It just creates kind of a new sub build that's quite exciting. Initiative at 60 here is fairly poor, although the song doesn't necessarily care as much about the speed of it as some of your others, and the bottom doesn't care a lot either. Bottom is a clean move 4 that makes a low music note. This is our first bottom move for yourself that makes a note, so this is definitely good and is as nice opposite to a powerful but situational song top half of this card. So for level 5 card choice, I think for the many, both halves of change tempo are great, handing out all sorts of conditions and making notes on both sides of the card. Whereas Thrilling Solo's top half is a build-defining song that not every music note player is going to want. The bottom half of Solo is good, but I don't think it's enough to pull the card by itself, as both the top half and the initiative are more specific, and the initiative is honestly quite bad. So you'll want to bring the song half of Solo at least some portion of the time if you're going to take the card. Otherwise, I think change tempo is a pretty clear choice for you. At level 6, our first option is Disorienting Dirge. Top is a double high note song. All enemies gain disadvantage on all of their attacks. Lasts for this turn and the next 2 turns, so 3 turns total. The song and name are actually the same as a level 4 song from first edition music note. This requiring 2 high notes and not lasting 3 turns instead of indefinitely is very fair, as this ability is very powerful, and even doubly so if you're playing with cards and perks that provide curses, as well as party members as well. I do think this is a much more fair version of the effect, and it makes it not an auto include because of these conditions. A lot of this class comes down to party composition as it is a heavy support class. So evaluating some of these cards in a vacuum is quite difficult. So that is one issue with evaluating these cards without knowing more about your party, is without other allies that curse or a focus on curses from your own abilities, this at face value may be weaker than it's like actually play weaker than it seems. But in the right party, this can be absolutely bananas, and it was very good in first edition. Initiative at 13 here is very important for the top, as you need it to get this effect up ASAP in order to get the full 3 turns of value out of it. 13 is a sweet spot where it goes before the vast majority of monster actions that attack, although some monsters such as hounds and chaos demons can outspeed this. Bottom is a move 2. You negate the next source of damage an ally within range 2 would suffer this round. This will vary pretty heavily in its value. It's kind of like a souped up ward for one ally, but sometimes the monsters will do a piddly attack 1 or attack 2 early in a round and kind of waste the ability. Of course, this also sometimes makes something like an attack 6 whiff, so I like that this is a move 2 and works within range 2 to give it some flexibility, as overall this is a fairly medium action. Other option here at level 6 is pull the strings. Top is an attack 2 range 4. You then control the target of the attack ability to move 2, and then you make a high note. This card kind of leans into Mind Thief's legacy on both halves here, as both halves can control the monsters in some way, which is kind of cool, because your actions typically grant your allies actions instead. This on face value is a little low for a level 6 card, so copying the attack from Thrilling solo, having the move ability provide some extra value or something like that will be pretty key for this one. If this is simply an attack 2 range 4 that makes a high note, we've had pretty comparable cards since level 1. Initiative at 34 here is not great, as manipulating monsters will often be something you want to do quickly, and this doesn't guarantee much of anything at this speed. Definitely pair this with a fast action, unless you're coordinating with your ally who's putting down a trap or something like that. Then you want to go as slow as possible. Bottom allows you to control a monster within range 5 to make an attack +0. So this will be based on their stat sheet. And this is a lot more powerful than something like an attack 2 on average, especially by level 6. This will typically vary between something like an attack 3 or attack 5, depending on the monster, the difficulty level your party is playing at, whether or not it's an elite or not, things of that nature. As a bottom action, this is pretty huge. However, does not make a music note or anything like that, and does use the monster deck, so it won't get any of your cool perks or anything like that. So for level 6 card choice, I think Disorienting Dirge's top action in the Disadvantage song and the bottom of Pull the Strings here, the controlling a monster to make an attack, are probably the strongest on offer here. I like Dirge a lot, as permanent disadvantage for 3 full rounds is great, and if timed well, can be up for nearly half of many scenarios. Again, this primarily gets value through curses, so you want to bring in cards like that and should have the 3 rolling curses from your own perks as well if you really want to use this. If that sounds like it might not work out for you, then Pull the Strings is quite good, and the bottom can be a pretty hefty attack each cycle, although it also doesn't particularly synergize with anything Music Note is trying to do in general. You could also go back for the level 5 you didn't take, as both are pretty powerful. In particular, if you skipped Change Tempo, as it's a universally useful card for essentially any music note. At level 7, our first option here is Inspiring Anthem. It grants one ally a move 5 jump. They then strengthen themselves, and then you produce a low note. This is such an incredible action. This is a lot of value, and it makes a low note 2 for some reason for extra value. This is so nice on powerful area attackers that don't necessarily move a lot, such as Craighart, or something like a Bruiser who wants to use their bottom action for a non-move ability this turn, ideally a second attack to really leverage the strengthen. But even out of combat, giving an ally a move 5 jump, and then moving yourself with the bottom action and getting a music note for next turn is great. Initiative at 50 here definitely reflects the power level of this card, as giving it the least consistent initiative possible does speak to the power of the card as a balancing factor. Bottom is a hefty grant action that gives an ally at any range an attack 5. That is also important to note is both halves of this do not specify a range whatsoever. It simply grants any one ally the action. This will feel similar to Pull the Strings bottom action with making the monster do an attack +0, but has no range restriction whatsoever. And typically having an ally attack is better than having a monster attack, as they get to use their own attack modifier deck and therefore perks. Of course, some monsters such as lurkers and living bones with multi-target can change the math, as well as other powerful implicit abilities, but players have very strong attack decks by level 7, and you avoid having to potentially pull like a curse out of their own deck as well that you might have put in there yourself. So overall, Inspiring Anthem has two fantastic halves, balanced by the worst possible initiative. Our other option at level 7 here is Wistful Wounding. This is our last single note song. It only costs one low note. You and all allies add Wound to your first attack each turn. This will wound pretty much every monster on the field very quickly, even if this only lasts 2 turns. This isn't really something you need to have up for 3 or 4 turns anyways, as you'll often wound all the monsters in a given room. It then falls off. You then clean up the room and move on to the next one, potentially recover this card and do it all over again. This results in a ton of free damage that bypasses shields, as wounds is one of the strongest offensive negative conditions you can apply in this game, and it really adds up quickly. Depending on card choices, you may not be playing many single note songs at this point in your career, so this definitely gains value in those situations as well, as I'd like to have at least one single note song on any build at any given point, so that I'm not sitting there with one note unable to do anything in a given round. Initiative at 6 here is perfect for the top and the bottom, as you want to apply wound before the monsters go to really accrue as much damage as possible. And then for the bottom action, giving an ally retaliate absolutely needs to go quickly as well. So as mentioned, bottom grants an ally within range 3, retaliate to range 2, and makes a high note. This is a really nice way to add a pretty easy 4 to 6 damage for your party in a given round, as retaliate to range 2 is pretty hefty and also produces a high note easily. Tied with a good initiative, this action isn't particularly standout, but it's good, simple bottom note generation that also contributes to the damage of the team. So I like it quite a bit. So for level 7 card choice, Inspiring Anthem is such a powerful and generically useful card, but I would definitely double check your initiative values of your other used cards to make sure you still have some have a slow one and a decent amount of fast ones if you plan on taking this card. If your party lacks ways to punch through shields, both halves of Wistful Wounding help a lot with that between the wound and the retaliate. So you may be in the market for a single note song anyways, as we haven't been offered one since level 2, and as mentioned, this is the last one. So I think, again, in a vacuum, Inspiring Anthem is really powerful, but I think Wistful Wounding will end up getting picked up a decent bit, simply due to the fact that it is one of the few one-note songs. It is, in my opinion, the most powerful of them, has a great initiative and a reasonable bottom action that makes a note as well. At level 8, we have Commanding Presence. Top grants one ally within range 3 a melee attack 3 that targets all adjacent enemies and makes a high note. This is pretty easily an attack 6, but has a very high ceiling, even sometimes being something like a cumulative 12 or even perhaps 15, but also allows the ally to flip a ton of attack modifiers, which can be absolutely bonkers by level 8, as a lot of the attack modifier decks have been getting pretty silly by mid-level and second edition for us so far. This also pairs really well with your Strengthen and Bless actions that you may still be running, as giving that ally Strengthen for all these attack 3s is absolutely bananas. The fact that this makes a note on top of all of this is really just a cherry on top. So you'll absolutely want to be looking out for scenarios where you can really leverage this card, particularly early on in a round, to try and get something like 2, 3, or 4 attacks off with the grant action. Speaking of picking your spots, Initiative 65 here sucks for this action, and absolutely needs to be paired with a fast card when used for the top. As with a lot of Sue Singer cards, the bottom does not care as much, so this will occasionally be a usable number, even if it's not ideal. Bottom is a big move 6, which is good as your move actions are fairly few and far between as this class. And we've only been offered one other move action since level 3. So both sides of this card are solid actions that you're going to want for pretty much every rest cycle on this class. Our other option at level 8 is Toughening Trill. This is a 2-note song, 1 high and 1 low note, that is a full combination of 2 of your level 1 songs, so in this case Defensive Ditty and Echoing Aria, giving you and all allies 1 shield and 1 retaliate range 2, but very importantly gives you the 4-round duration of Echoing Aria and not the much worse 2-round duration of Toughening Trill. Sorry, of Defensive Ditty, pardon me. This card is Toughening Trill. Um, so this combining 2 full cards and 2 reasonable songs from level 1 into 1 action is fantastic, and will both absorb a decent amount of damage and output damage for you. As I mentioned before, range retaliate is a lot better than melee, as range monsters often end up around that range too. Initiative at 78 here, once again, sucks for this card, as you effectively waste a full round of the top action by doing it slowly. So once again, you need to pair this with a fast card when using the top half. This is one of the reasons I mentioned looking at your initiative's last level with Inspiring Anthems 50, as you may only have a handful of fast or slow cards at this point, so you'll need to be careful with your card choices because you really need a fast initiative for both of these cards when using the top half. Bottom is a move 3, attack 2, range 3, which is a good and solid action, but nothing really crazy at this point. If this made a music note, I would be singing another tune. No pun intended, I promise. But this does combine a decent move with a bit of damage, flipping an attack modifier, so there is that. So for level 8 card choice, if your party lacks some survivability and damage, then Toughening Trill is a great choice, as it fully replaces 2 level 1 cards. Otherwise, I think Commanding Presence looks very powerful on both sides, and to me feels like the more fleshed out card, as I'm not super high on Trill's bottom as just a move and attack, with relatively small values on both. Commanding Presence's top attack, all monsters and extra ally for 3, can result in some really big turns, and would be a low-level loss card that would be very powerful, which tend to play well as high-level non-losses, speaking from previous experience. So I do think Commanding Presence is the pick here. However, I can absolutely acknowledge that Toughening Trill is a good card, and if you're using that top half well, it is a perfectly fine pickup. Finally, at the level 9s, first option here is Captivating Performance. This is our only quad note song. It requires 2 high and 2 low notes, so your maximum of each. At the end of each of your turns, perform Disarm, range 3 in a triangle hex formation, and this lasts 2 turns. You get this ability twice. Well, the area Disarm did come back, but has some pretty important differences. First, this is a level 9, and it takes 4 notes, 2 of each. So this does not work at the free songs from Symphonic Medley's Lost from level 3. It also happens on 2 turns back to back, so this is undeniably powerful and quite the capstone and callback for the class. This is a great payoff for being able to produce your notes consistently. However, as you're typically limited to once per turn without the level 1 loss or the specific perk, as that third way to do it is actually the other level 9, and therefore you can't have both at the same time, you will have to invest a decent amount of your notes in a given rest cycle to enable this, so it does have a real cost. With that being said, this is a fun, splashy, and powerful effect that has a tried and true past record of being one of the most powerful abilities in the game. So I do like it as a level 9. Given that you basically have to invest so much of your rest cycle into making this work. Initiative at 71 here is definitely unfortunate, as the double area disarm may end up going to waste if you go slow here and fast on the next turn. So you'll typically want to go fast and then slow, or slow on both turns to make best use of this action. Bottom is a move 4. You then move your character tokens on each of your active song abilities backwards 1 slot. This effectively gives all of your active songs an extra turn, provided they were not started this turn, which is great and important when you likely won't be able to use the top half of this card every rest cycle. Giving many of your songs that only last 2 or 3 turns an extra full turn on top of a solid move 4 is fantastic value for something that's so easy to do each rest cycle. Other card here at level 9 is Grand Finale. Top is a move 4 jump. You control all enemies move through with the move ability to perform a melee attack 3 against one another, and then you gain a note of your choice in addition to any other notes you gain this round. This is very powerful and makes your double note song so easy to play on a given turn as long as your bottom action produces a note, which is really easy to do. Enhancing the movability through boots up to something like a move 5 or move 6 makes it really easy to control 2 or 3 monsters to hit each other, and frankly makes this bananas for a non-loss ability, as a level 9 card generally should be. But this is a great marriage of utility, damage, and note generation for this class that is really, really powerful and quite fun as well. Initiative of 46 here is a fair and balancing point, as the top needs the right setup and typically wants to go quickly as well. The bottom doesn't really care much at all, as it is a loss, so overall this is fine but not ideal. Bottom is a move 4. You may immediately play any number of cards from your hand and discard pile to perform the song actions of those cards, ignoring all note requirements. Skip moving your character token on active songs this round. This cannot be recovered. This allows you to essentially play any number of songs from hand and discard pile and gives them each an extra round worth of duration. This is very evocative of the name of this card as the grand finale, putting up something like 4 or 5 songs for free, fully ignoring all the note costs on them, is a ton of fun, very powerful, and then you get them all for an extra round as well. Very much worthy of a level 9 loss. Great thing to do in the last round, last room of a given scenario to really close things out pretty easily. Very cool card. For level 9 card choice, Captivating Performance's top has been, as mentioned, tested in the past and is an absolutely busted ability, but as the only 4-note song, you'll need to really work for it. The other half is a great bread and butter action for when that doesn't work out, for any music note players will appreciate, lengthening your song's output. Grand Finale has a fantastic staple top half that breaks the fundamental rule of this class, being 1 note per turn, and has a crazy explosive bottom loss. So I think I lean towards Finale by a little bit, but I do acknowledge the power of a repeatable area disarm. It's something I've experienced before quite a bit previously. So for me, the main reason why I pick Finale at this level is because to me it's more fun, which is why it gets the nod, as that is always my ethos and rationale for level 9 cards anyways. For perks here, normally I do these in order from top to bottom. However, I would argue this class has a semi-mandatory perk ability that should be taken first, if not second. So I'll discuss that first. So it's the second non-attack modifier perk ability here. Whenever you perform a song action, if you have any unused notes, gain 1 note of your choice in addition to any other notes gained that round. This is of course because when you play a song, you lose all leftover notes. This allows you to essentially carry one of them over and even change what it is because you're gaining a note. So if it was a low note, you can make a high note instead or vice versa. This is one of the only ways to essentially gain an extra note on a given turn and really breaks the fundamental rules of this class. All of these abilities are important, and there's only 3 of them total, so it is very important to note these. And I think it's a really easy way to make transitioning between songs and rest cycles much easier on this class. As far as the rest of the options, first option replaces a -2 with 1 -2 that blesses 2 targets card. Again, this doesn't say range on it or an ally, so you can always give yourself and 1 friend a bless. Very solid. Of course, it doesn't get rid of the -2, which is often close to another null for you, as you have quite a few attack 2s. So this is a mid priority for me overall. But with the right party composition, definitely shoots up a lot for allies that make a lot of big attacks. Blesses are very impactful. Next option is replacing a -1 with a 0. That skips moving your character tokens on your active songs at the end of the round card. This has been really, really powerful for us and is a good early to mid pick, especially once you get in the flow of playing multiple songs at once, as having multiple songs get 1 extra round duration every time you flip this modifier is really, really powerful. Of course, if you've already flipped one this turn, another one doesn't do anything. So I kind of like taking 1 or 2 of these early and then maybe not taking all 3 until later on. Next option here is replacing a -1 with a 0 stun. This is a very solid perk option and adds some hard crowd control into your kit. Of course, this is fairly random and not as controllable, so it is more balanced that way. But anything that removes a -1 and adds a 0 with a good negative condition on it is always a reasonable pickup. The next one is replace 2 zeros with 1+1 strengthen an ally card. This is good because it actually deck thins, getting rid of 2 cards and replacing it with 1. Strengthen on any ally is fantastic value and is a good for a supporting class like this. And just getting rid of those pesky zeros is also fantastic. Next one here is replacing 1 0 and 1 1 with 2+2s. If you're attacking a lot, this is a very powerful perk. If you're not, I think this is mid to possibly late. As one thing to note with this class is because this class attacks overall probably the least, unless you're that attack focused sub build, perks like this are simply not a priority, and you're going to want to look at your 3 non-attack modifier perks as early pickups instead. Next one here, you can take 3 times. You add 1, grant 1 ally a move 2 or melee attack 2 rolling card. These have been bananas for us and are something that our Music Note took early and have been really making great effect with. These do not specify a range whatsoever on them, so you can grant any ally the move 2 or melee attack 2. Such great value. And it's nice that it has a bailout where you won't always be able to do the melee attack 2. At least someone gets the move 2. But the melee attack 2 on a perk that's a rolling modifier is just so powerful and is an easy inclusion into most Soothsayer decks. Next option here is add 3 rolling curses. If you're playing around with Muddle or other effects that add curses, these are a really easy pickup. For a single perk mark, you're getting 3 of these at rolling, so they don't really detract from your card density at all. These are really nice as well and add to that defensive nature of Soothsayer a bit. And then for the last 2 non-perk modifiers, again, these go up in value if you're not attacking a lot. At the end of each scenario, each character in that scenario gains 8 experience if you completed your battle goal. This has been crazy and rocketing us through our levels as our bards took this very early on. And he has gotten his battle goal in, I believe, every scenario thus far. Getting 8 bonus experience isn't quite an extra full snare's worth of experience unless you're playing at very low levels. We're playing at level 4 right now at a +1 difficulty with extra conditions. So we're getting 12 plus 8, we're getting 20 experience in any given scenario before our own personal experience. So we're leveling every 2 scenarios easily, and low-level characters are even leveling every scenario if they do lots, and we get some experience from the scenario itself. This is a great way to support your allies and level them up quicker, which of course is fun. You get more perks, you get more cards, that sort of thing. The final non-attack modifier perk is your double. During ordering of initiative in rounds in which you declare a long rest, gain 1 music note of your choice, and each of your allies may decrease their initiative by 10. This is neat, as it does allow you to gain notes while long resting, as long resting might otherwise be awkward with this class, as you can't generally gain notes with it. Again, this is better for non-attack focused music notes and maybe a high pick for them. Otherwise, I think this waits till mid to late game, as the attack modifier perks for this class are of a very high quality, and if you are attacking, I think they are a better priority for you. As far as masteries go, the first mastery is in a single scenario, performs 7 different song actions. This is pretty easy to achieve by level 3, when you can have 3 of the 7 of them done on the first turn via the loss, allows you to play 3 for free. But it's also doable before then, provided the scenario lasts a little longer, and you're likely going to want to use the loss that provides an extra note for the next 6 turns. Our music note did this at level 2 fairly easily with the above method of playing that loss that provides an additional music note for the next 6 turns, and essentially bringing in every card that had a song attached to it. The second mastery is more difficult, and to me, definitely more indicative of the actual mastery of the class. In a single scenario, create 20 or more notes and use each note you create in a song. You have to produce 20 music notes and use every single note you create in a song, meaning you cannot have any wasted notes either. This was achieved at level 4 and took a pretty long scenario, as well as us cooperating the last turn to not kill the last monster when he'd used 18 of his 20 notes and had 2 notes ready to go for the final 2-note song. This one takes proper sequencing, a bit of luck, and potentially cooperation, So it definitely has some difficulty there. You also probably need to take some pretty specific cards to make it work, as I think ways to produce multiple notes is essentially mandatory, as a 20 round scenario is going to be fairly uncommon in this game. So that about wraps it up for this video. Next up is going to be Cthulhu, sometimes known as Squidface, as it is the last member of our current party. We just unlocked Circles this week with my wife's retirement as 3 spears, and we'll be unlocking both Sun and Triangle shortly, with my plan to retire into Triangles, as it is my favorite class from 1st edition. If you stuck all the way through this video right into the end, once again, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.